That was the district attorney reading a statement on behalf of Shanann's brother. I want to bring in Latonia Hines. She's a prosecutor. Latonia, thank you so much for being here with us. I mean, just listening to these statements, this is such an emotional day. We just saw the picture of Shanann with little Bella and little Celeste. The defendant in this case ultimately pled guilty, is now sentenced to life without parole. But these victim impact statements, how did you feel watching these statements unfold this morning?
It's so agonizing, and what's so sad is that these deaths were so senseless. It wasn't necessary for this to happen, and for them to happen in such a gruesome way. And what Watts put this family through from the beginning, between lying about what happened, then trying to shift the blame on Sinead herself, just absolutely atrocious. The best thing that he could do, he sort of did, which was make this plea, but he didn't do it in the best way to even get to this point. I mean, it's just absolutely heart-wrenching.
Absolutely. Oh, I mean, we were watching this, and it's so difficult to see. One thing, when we watched the press conference, a lot more facts came out because not everything had been released to the public. And we saw the district attorney say what Chris Watts told the media was lies. It's not often a district attorney gets to make that bold of a statement. What did you make of that?
But it's true. It's absolutely true. What we learned is, even in the beginning stages, when the wife and the daughters were missing, he was lying the whole entire time. This man is a pathological liar. On some levels, he must be some type of sociopath. It is just absolutely just shocking that he could have done all of these things and had no type of conscience in doing it. And I think it's true. I think that on some levels he wanted to begin again. And it's so shocking when we see things like this. It's kind of like what we saw in Ross Harris with regards to the child and the hot car death. The idea that somebody feels that the only way that they can get out is to kill their loved ones like this, awful.
Absolutely unbelievable. And you brought up a good point that the district attorney told us a little bit more about the incredible amount of evidence that they had that was completely inconsistent with what Chris Watts told the police in his statement and with the media. We may see more information come out as time goes on. Stick with us, Latonia. We're going to continue to review the victim impact statements which occurred today in the Chris Watts sentencing. This is Sandy. This is Shanann's mother. Listen to her emotional statement now. So difficult to watch for this family suffering, making these statements in the Chris Watts sentencing hearing this morning. Latonia Hines, I want to bring you back in, talk a little bit about what we heard in the press conference. So the district attorney gave us some insight as to how they reached this plea agreement. Of course, Chris Watts is going to spend the rest of his life behind bars. He's got 3 life sentences plus 48 years, no possibility of parole. But the death penalty was taken off the table. Much of that, based on what the DA said today at the conference, seemed to be because the family wanted some kind of closure. Is that typical in cases like this, in your experience as a prosecutor?
You know what, sometimes yes, because you know what, they've gone through the agony and having to go through and hear all of this, you know, in a trial, and you never know what's going to happen at the trial. Although we, without a doubt, can believe with all the evidence that he should be found guilty, it could be a mistrial and you have to go through all of this again. And for them, they just wanted some closure. Unfortunately, they can't bring back their family member, but they know at least there's some bit of peace in knowing this man will never get out. He will never get out of prison. He will be in there for all of his natural life, which is where he should definitely be. And for them, that's got to give them a bit of peace, because every day, I'm sure it's just like putting them in another piece of hell. And that's what the trial would be. I think, you know, every victim and every victim's family, you know, they have to make the decisions for themselves about what they can and can't take in this process. And as you're aware, trials are not easy. And especially, you know, the way that his defense was in the beginning, where he was on some levels attacking his own wife that he killed. I mean, I think that's probably the most insulting thing that we've heard since, you know, the situation happened where we found out that the wife and the daughters were dead.
Right, absolutely, and we know that originally Chris Watts' story had changed, and the district attorney said The evidence that we have is completely inconsistent with what he said to the media and in his statement to police. We do have to go to a break, but make sure to stick with us. A lot more on the Chris Watts case when we return. That was Chris Watts' mother, Cindy Watts, with an emotional statement, just asking why this senseless crime had to happen. Latonia Hines, I want to bring you back in. Now, something interesting about this case is that he pled guilty, right? Chris Watts pled guilty, so we didn't watch all of the evidence come out in a courtroom. We saw it largely play out in the media, right? And then today we learned more information. And I believe it was last Friday, Thursday, Chris Watts' parents came out and spoke about how they believed their son, how they questioned the plea deal. But then today, after meeting with victims' rights advocates and seeing some of the evidence that the district attorney had in that statement that we just watched, they said, we're not going to ask for leniency. That's something we didn't necessarily expect to see. In my view, that means the prosecutor really had him dead to rights.
Without a doubt. And think about it. Any parent wants to believe the best in their child, and they would never believe that their child would do something so evil. I mean, you would think that your child is a monster. I mean, because in my opinion, it would be a monster for somebody to do what he did. And for them to have to grapple with that, it must have been extremely, extremely hard. But I bet you one thing, the evidence that they had, it must have been something that was so, and especially because we're hearing some of it too, it must have been something that was so convincing for them that they're not asking for leniency, because that's usually what happens at these types of hearings. You will see that the parents or the loved ones of the defendant will ask for some type of mitigation, but because he's pleading to at this point too, I guess maybe their thought process is at least, you know, there's being some type of answering to the crime, especially now that they've seen and they've heard some of this evidence. No one would want to believe that their loved one, their child, would be capable of something like this.
Oh, absolutely. And we didn't see all of it, but some of what we heard from the district attorney today at the press conference was photographs, text message, phone calls, some what sounded like solid evidence. We do have to go to a break, but make sure to stick with us. There's so much more to discuss in the Chris Watts case. This is the district attorney during the Chris Watts sentencing hearing today. Chris Watts pled guilty to the murder of his wife, his 2 children, and to unlawful termination of a pregnancy, facing 3 life sentences plus 48 years. Latonia, let me bring you back in. So the district attorney really laying everything out today in those 2 burning questions: why and how? And the answer only lies with one person, Chris Watts. So now that he's pled guilty, his parents are begging for answers. Her family is begging for answers. The district attorney is saying he doesn't think that Chris Watts is ever going to give those answers. But he could, right? At this point, he's pled guilty. So if he wanted to come clean and give the family some closure, he could do that. Correct?
He could do that. He absolutely could. He could also apologize. He could do all of those things. You know, you see defendants make a statement, and a lot of times the judge wants them to make some type of statement because they make that consideration. But we already know what the sentence is going to be: 3 consecutive life sentences. Judge can't go and give him the death penalty or anything like that. That's not legally possible. But here's the issue. I don't think we will ever, even if he did speak, I don't think you'll ever get the truth out of him. And I don't think you'll ever understand this. This is an incomprehensible crime. So I don't think anything that he could say could make someone understand why you would kill the mother of your 2 kids, who was already pregnant with another child, and then kill your 2 young daughters. There are other ways, if you wanted to start again, that you could have started again without destroying all of these lives. But he took a selfish route. He took a selfish route, and on some levels, a narcissistic route of thinking that he could get away with it. And so, I don't think that, to be honest, I don't think anything that he could possibly say at this point in time will make anybody understand why he made these choices.
Certainly would not bring back this beloved family. We're going to continue to watch the prosecutor's statement today as he brings us through this case. And what we just heard, I think that's such a strong statement. What would make a seemingly normal father and husband annihilate his entire family? Take a look at the DA's statement now. Hearing more from the district attorney about the horrific facts of this crime, Chris Watts pled guilty. He will be spending the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. I want to bring Latonia Hines back in. So the district attorney in this case, guilty plea to every charge. That was part of the deal, taking the death penalty off the table, but Chris Watts had to plead guilty to everything. And now he's making a statement. And in this statement, we find out that Bella struggled for her life. Just heart-wrenching details. We find out a little bit more about the evidence that the district attorney had, the results of the investigation. Would Chris Watts have had any shot in front of a jury?
I mean, there's always a chance. I mean, I think that's what happens, especially in a death penalty case, right? The best outcome for a defense attorney in a death penalty case, especially like this one, would have been for him to have gotten life. And that's what we've got here. But the facts are they were so stacked against him. I mean, and much like we were just talking about, there's no way to explain this away. And I hearken back to when he tried to blame his wife for the deaths of the children. Just absolute, like that to me, like he has thought about this, and even in thinking about it, he was still trying to find a way out. And I just find that to be awful. And I think probably in talking to his defense attorneys, they told him, this is the evidence that's against you, and it's going to be very hard to find a juror, you know, who's going to find you not guilty based off of this evidence. And if you want to save your life, this is your best opportunity.
Right, and that's many times in a death penalty case, that's the goal of the defense attorney, to save their client's life. Here, there was a plea agreement, and the district attorney making very clear in his statement to the public that the story Chris Watts told to the media was a lie and was directly contradicted by the evidence that the district attorney had. We do need to go to a break, but make sure to stick with us. We'll have more on the Chris Watts case when we return. That was the judge sentencing Chris Watts to multiple life sentences, plus 48 years. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars without the possibility of parole. Latonia Hines, I want to bring you back in. Now, we know that there was a plea agreement that was entered into between the district attorney and the defendant, taking the death penalty off the table. So this presentation today at the sentencing, could the judge have rejected the district attorney's recommendation? Could he have sentenced Chris Watts to something lesser?
Well, yes. I mean, it's still ultimately up to the judge to accept the plea, and the judge could have decided that he thought, for whatever reason, I mean, it'd be obviously, I don't think it would ever happen in this type of facts, that maybe this is too harsh, he wasn't going to accept it, maybe there's some mitigation or something like that. If it were the case where you had already had an agreement with the defense attorney and the prosecutor, and the judge rejects the plea offer, then the defendant would have a right to decide whether or not they wanted to still go forward with the plea if the judge decided to do something that was more of an upward type of punishment. But in this type of case, you wouldn't have seen a judge. I think it'd be very rare to see a judge say, hey, I don't think you should get life without the possibility of parole. I would only consider life with parole. That just would not happen.
Certainly with a case involving these two young children, his wife being pregnant, obviously the judge made a point of saying you deserve the maximum 48 years for that particular crime. So look, there's multiple life sentences concurrently, some running consecutively. It doesn't really matter. Chris Watts will be in jail for the rest of his life. This was such an emotional day in the courtroom, watching these victim impact statements for such a senseless crime, and still the families don't really have the answers. But we know now that what the DA had, the type of evidence they had, and the rationale behind the plea agreement, which was explained at today's press conference. This has just been a big day in the courtroom. It's my time to sign off. Latonia will be sticking with you, and Aaron Keller will be doing the daily debrief. Make sure to tune in.
Okay.